We gather this hour.
We gather this hour.
We gather this hour.
We gather this hour as people of faith.
As people of faith.
As people of faith.
As people of faith.
With joys and sorrows.
With joys and sorrows.
With joys and sorrows.
Gifts and needs.
Gifts and needs.
Gifts and needs.
We light this beacon of hope.
We light this beacon of hope.
We light this beacon of hope.
Sign of our quest for truth and meaning.
Sign of our quest for truth and meaning.
In celebration.
In celebration.
In celebration.
Of the life we share together.
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 We share together.
We share together.
We share together.
Yes.
In an interview with Krista Tippett, the civil rights leader Ruby Sales spoke about what happened in the after of the movement. In other words, in the aftermath of the civil rights movements of the 1950s and 60s. And it's a sort of a long quote. I'll read it all for you. She said, in the post-civil rights Southern freedom movement, people thought that what the movement had been about was jobs and position status, when in fact it had not been about that at all. It had been about what King talked about, the mountaintop. When he was talking about that, he was talking about a higher level of consciousness. He was talking about a movement where we harmonize the I with the we and the we with the I. He was talking about a Pentecost moment. And so with that misunderstanding, she says, and so with that misunderstanding, the movement became materialized, and all the things that had really united Black people and held us together in terms of being part of a community where we were all well guarded and well protected went away, and that many of us left our homes never to look back. And in doing that, we left the Black community unguarded. And the mission was no longer a beloved community, but the mission became integration. So, in these last couple of messages this last month, where we've been sort of working with this idea of beloved community, I've been trying to challenge us to wrestle with the often contradictory and confounding ideas around what beloved community is. I said a couple of weeks ago, it's not about you. Beloved community is not about you. But then last week I turned around and said, you know what? It's totally about you. Beloved community is completely about you. So today, those contradictory and confounding ideas, right? So today I want to explore this idea of materiality, or really its opposite, the sense that beloved community is something that is immaterial and that we make an error when we try to materialize it. A couple of weeks ago, I shared a story. I shared a story about a Texas fraternity and a little bit of one of their initiation traditions. Now, I won't go into the whole story again, but the gist of this tradition was to have the initiates, the newly minted members, witness the older members doing push-ups by the side of a creek. And some of the members, and they would do them one by one, and some of the members could only do one or two at a time, and others could do 50 or more. But when one member would tire, another would tap him out and continue the task. And the initiate's job during this whole process was simply to witness and count the total number of push-ups done by the group. And the intent of this was to embed this metaphor about the kind of relationships needed to accomplish more than what could be done by one person alone. They did thousands, maybe thousands of push-ups, but one person couldn't have done those alone. It took this whole group, right? Now, it's not a perfect metaphor, I said that before, but it's a pretty good one. And at least it made an impression on the man who told me the story. I call him Tom, who shared the story with me many years ago. But of course, the reason Tom shared the story with me, alas, was not to say how wonderful this metaphor was and how it really changed his life. No, he shared the story with me to illustrate how something like this can get twisted into an entirely different story. So after initially sharing the story of the push-ups with me, he said 15 years later, long after he had graduated college, he returned to the fraternity during their initiation. It was sort of a reunion for him. And he was particularly excited to accompany the new young initiates to the Creekside push-up rite because that rite had made such an important impression on him when he was 18. But now he's in his 30s, and he was horrified by what he saw. Because instead of the fraternity members doing push-ups one by one, the members were demanding that the initiates do the push-ups and all together. And when one initiate got tired and couldn't do another one, instead of being relieved, he was berated, belittled, and had beer cans thrown at him. See, friends, what had been a formational moment in Tom's life had, in the space of 15 years, become just another hazing ritual with no point other than sadistic entertainment. Now, I could go on, Tom and I were talking about this, I could go on for a long time about why that occurred, about how traditions evolve and change, but that's a whole conversation for another time. The point here that I want to make is that this is an example of the members of that fraternity in the span of 15 years or so had materialized this bit of ritual. They had lost the metaphor that they were trying to illustrate, that is, the power of a relational community to accomplish an impossible task, and turned it into a material goal. How many push-ups can you make a bunch of guys do? The push-ups were never the point. But then at some moment in that 15-year gap, they became the point. When we talk about beloved community, it's often in this context of the country's long racist history and the damage that history continues to wreak on our society. As such, beloved community becomes the end goal of a reconciliation, a salvation from that history. It becomes some kind of future state where we as humans have finally resolved all that conflict by means of material gains through integration of schools and workplaces and social spaces by means of fair and equitable employment and education for everyone. These material gains somehow have saved us from our racist history. But I think what Ruby Sales is pointing to is a sense that we internalize these material accomplishments as evidence of, or even the point of civil rights movements. But as she said, it was not really about those things. Integration and jobs and access to education are the materialization of what is truly intended to be a spiritual transformation. Another way to look at this is to say that this country continues to struggle with its racist past and present because we have not made the spiritual transformation that is beloved community. Instead, we have lost sight, lost the intention of beloved community, and have instead experienced civil rights as material accomplishment, or in some cases, a lack of material accomplishment. Like our frat boys out at the creek, we keep demanding the push-ups be done without realizing that the push-ups were ours to do, without realizing that the push-ups were a symbolic means, not an end. Beloved community is not a material thing. It is a spiritual idea. And of course, there are material things that result from the transformation that is beloved community. When a transformation occurs, there's a material change, right? But it's critical that we do not confuse those material results for the immaterial reality of the idea. As I've been talking about and writing about this month, beloved community is a kind of unfolding and enfolding process. It's a process of enfolding all of us into a deeper relationship with each other and an unfolding of what emerges from those relationships. It's a redefinition, a restructuring of our relationships, all of our relationship to ourselves, our relationship to those we love, our relationship to those we don't love so much, our relationships to this earth, to this planet, our relationships to God. It is about our willingness to let go of who we imagine ourselves to be in service to who we individually and collectively truly are, which is beautiful, wondrous, glorious manifestations of a love we are just beginning to awaken to. Amen, my friends. And I love you. And may we live in blessing.